Hey everyone, welcome back to PolyCosm for another Design Principles episode. We are still working on our Nurbeck project, but it's taking quite a bit of time. We wanted to keep making content for you in the meantime, so we are using this opportunity to create videos on topics we've been meaning to talk about. I wanted to talk about shape language in design, but in a manner that I don't think that's talked about very often. I'm sure you all heard someone talk about basic shape design theory, and saw these usual suspects used for demonstration purposes. And for good reason, because this is a very important fundamental thing to understand when it comes to creating good design with appealing shapes. I'm sure you've all heard how a boxy shape like this gives the impression of stability. A triangular shape can be used to imply danger or pain. And of course how the round shapes gives off a friendly vibe. There are a bunch of resources you can find online that talks about this theory further if you are interested. But I don't think I have anything more add to that, more than what's already out there. Instead, what I wanted to do with this video is to take this to the next level and talk about a method that can help you create ideas that have a coherent shape language within itself. For demonstration purposes, I want to sketch 3 different armor designs for a character. I'm just going to draw a base figure to do this first, and I know I could have used a 3D model as a base as well. Being a 3D and 2D channel, I wanted to point that possibility out. You can also do that if you want to. The reason that I'm drawing the base figure here is that I just really like drawing, and that's what I wanted to do. Anyway, after our base figure is ready, and I barely stop myself from going into way too much detail with it, I'm going to knock its opacity back and create a new layer on top. My aim here is to create a custom shape that will determine the shape language for this armor concept. I want different parts of the armor to look like they all belong together as a whole, but I also want the whole suit of armor to stand out with its own shape language. This can be a very useful technique if you are creating different groups or factions in your world, in your own setting or something like that, and you wanted each one to have a unique look of its own. I can stretch and modify my main shape when I'm using it to create the different elements of the armor, as long as I don't deviate from it too much. This is a good time to remind ourselves about big, medium, small shape hierarchy and how we can use that to our advantage. I talked about that before in more detail in another video, which you should be seeing a link for on the screen right now if Christina is doing her job properly, so make sure you go check that out. Of course, there's no reason not to modify your main shape a little either. You can cut into it, you can kinda sculpt into it a little bit if you want. I mean, in the end, this is a very similar approach to 3D modeling in some sense. I can use my main shape to block something out, then add or subtract from it to push my design further. As you can see, that's exactly what I'm doing here with the chest part. After sketching some smaller details like paneling and holes, like little screw holes and things like that, I think I'm ready to move on to the next concept. Again, I sketch out a main shape for myself to follow, something a little more triangular and sharper this time, and I get to work. This can be an interesting challenge you can set for yourself as well, to test out your design skills. It forces you to think more abstractly instead of focusing too much on finding reference for specific things like chest armor and then leg armor and then shoulder armor, etc. A previous design principles video actually goes over the abstracted method when it comes to using reference and designing, so you might want to check that out. I struggled quite a bit here figuring out the hip area with this one, and in the end decided on sorta splitting my main shape in half for each leg. It sorta works, I think, and it also creates a nice negative shape that is resembling my main shape. This is something that gets forgotten sometimes, I think. It's not all about the shapes you draw, but also the negative shapes that appear between your shapes. I feel like I'm saying shapes or shape a lot right now, so I'm gonna try to stop. No need to draw the hands and the face again, of course, so I just copy them over and start doing my second line pass over my sketch. It's not like I'm necessarily finished with the design when I'm going over the initial sketch. I still change things up if I feel like it. I realized here some of the parts were a little bit too chunky and their volume didn't quite feel right, so I adjusted them around a little. Okay, time for another sketch. Let's go with something a lot rounder this time. And I'm also going to beef up the proportions for this one a little, make him look a bit chunkier than the others. I realized that I tend to start with the chest piece first with these designs. And I think that's because that area ends up becoming the focal point most of the time when you're designing armor or clothing or similar things. It helps the overall design if you establish your shape language there first, then expand outwards. I'm guessing if he was wearing a helmet, that probably would have been designed first. Helmets do definitely become more iconic in character design if the character is wearing one. Since we have a lot of circles with the design here, I'm trying to vary their sizes to make sure I'm not creating a lot of repetition. Our brains pick up on repetition and patterns very quickly, and it can be quite distracting if you have too much of it in your design. Of course, deliberately created repetition can be a very powerful tool as well. As I'm detailing, I'm keeping in mind where to put more details and where to create rest areas and things like that. Even though these are supposed to be quick ideations, it is important to hint at the design direction any of them might go towards if they were picked to be further developed. I'm just going to take the time to clean this up a little and get them ready for presentation. I'm adding some more line thickness and variation in parts, changing some of the areas that I wasn't super happy with, the usual stuff. Don't be afraid to go back and go over your previous sketches. Usually after a few you tend to, warm up and you tend to be drawing a little better. So I actually take the time to go back to my previous sketches, especially the first one, and kinda make it look a little bit better because they kinda end up looking worse than like my third or fourth sketch. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second and just go over these for a bit to make sure I'm getting my point across clearly. Right, with this first one, even though I modified it a little, you can see my main shape here, right in the middle of the chest armor. It's a big dominant shape, and it sets the design language for the rest of the armor. And here, on the second one, it is a lot clearer. And you can also see here what I was talking about earlier when it comes to negative shapes. On the last one, we have our main shape here, extending all the way around his head. A smaller version of it on the shoulder, and a slightly modified version here. And of course, they repeat all over the design, modified and adjusted just enough to act as a unifying factor. Here is the final concept sheet, ready for presentation. I've added a little bit of lighting to make it look prettier, because everything looks way better with some dramatic lighting over it. This was a bit of a short video, but I hope it was informative and useful. I suggest trying out this method on your own and finding out how you can use this to your advantage in your workflow. And of course, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments section below. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next week. Bye everyone.